Hello, welcome to Biblio Files, the little show on AADL TV brought to you by the Ann Arbor District Library, where we take a few moments each week to discuss one book topic. My name is Amanda, and with me, as always, is Christopher and Lucy. And this week, we are joined once again by Katie. Welcome, Katie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. We have got a great book today. So normally we pick one book topic, and each of us chooses a different book and we discuss the variety of items at the table. But this week we are breaking the format a bit and we have all read the same book, and we are very excited because the book we are all discussing is 2022's Washtenaw Read. And the Washtenaw Read is voted upon by the community every year and a new book is chosen. And this year the book is Being Human, an Unrepentant Memoir of a Disability Rights Activist by Judith Heumann with Kristin Joyner. And before we get started on our discussion, I want to read you a brief synopsis of Judy before we get to discussing the book. If you want more information on the other community events involving Washtenaw Read, you can visit washtenaw.reads.org to see what else is going on around town. So, who is Judy Heumann? Judy Heumann is a lifelong advocate for the rights of disabled people. She was born in 1947 and contracted polio in 1949 in Brooklyn, New York, and began to use a wheelchair for her mobility. She was denied the right to attend school because she was considered a fire hazard at the age of 5. Her parents played a strong role in fighting for her rights as a child, but Judy soon determined that she, working in collaboration with other disabled people, had to play an advocacy role due to continuous discrimination. Throughout her life, Judy has traveled in her motorized wheelchair to countries on every continent, in urban and rural communities alike. She has played a role in the development and implementation of major legislation, including IDEA, Section 504, the Americans with Disability Act, and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. She is now an internationally recognized leader in the disability rights community, and this is her memoir. The book was published in 2020, and it's around 200 pages. So everybody, what do we think about this book? Anybody?
I loved it. I mean, I'm so glad I read it, and I learned so much that I feel like almost we shouldn't even have to be learning at this point. Like, it should be knowledge that we have. So I really appreciate that this book was written to get her story out and just what she had to do to fight for basically civil rights for the disabled community. So I loved it.
I really loved this book too. I first learned about Judy when I saw the film Crip Camp, which you all have probably seen too, which was nominated for an Oscar in 2021. And so seeing this book nominated for the Reads and just knowing that there was more to the story was super exciting for me. So I was very excited to read the book. And I actually read the audiobook first and highly recommend that to anybody who likes listening to books. The narrator is Ali Stroker, and she's really amazing on her own, but I did not really know who she was until Amanda told me. I just thought that she was a wonderful, wonderful narrator who really captured Judy's voice in a really particularly incredible way. But Amanda, why don't you tell them what you told me about Ali?
Well, I learned it from Lucy over here, but Ali Stroker was the first wheelchair actor to perform on Broadway. And I didn't realize that till I was reading the book and I was telling Lucy, I'm listening to the audiobook. It's great. And then Lucy says, well, isn't that narrated by Ali Stroker? And then it like all came together. I'm like, yes. So the audio is wonderful. She's a great reader. And to me, that was, even though I've heard Judy's voice in the movie, I've also seen Crip Camp, but to me that the voice, not only the physical voice, but also the way she was speaking and telling the story of Judy, it just made me feel like Judy was reading the story or telling me about her life and all of the things she's done, all of her accomplishments. Yes, I'm glad, Katie, you were able to grab some of the audio as well.
Yeah.
I also love the book so much. Her personality comes out so vividly. And the lesson of her relentless pursuit to just be seen and included in general society, I think it's both moving and really instructive. The powers that are in place are not going to just roll over and do things that they should be doing. You really have to doggedly force them into things. And, I guess we can just jump into some of the story in the book, but the fact of the government stalling and lying and the duplicity and the endless foot dragging, it's kind of maddening sometimes. The other thing I just loved about it is that, she really doesn't focus on how much she wishes she could play jump rope or run with the other kids or do all these other things. She just wants to be part of society like any person. And I think it was such an important part of the book for me.
Well, even to piggyback on that, at the beginning of the book, the very first line is, "I never wished I didn't have a disability." And then at the end of the book, she wraps it up by saying, how is it that we get to read a book where that's the first sentence and it's true facts? What I loved about Judy is she was relentless. There were so many physical and emotional and mental challenges she had to go through just in living her daily life. But here she was, a leader of a movement and representing people across the country trying to get stuff done. And it wasn't easy. If they wanted to go from California to DC on an airplane, was the transportation accessible? Was the hotel accessible? Was the airplane accessible? Like, she almost got arrested on an airplane because they said she couldn't fly alone because she needed help. And her dogged determination and perseverance just to keep going and keep going and keep going. Like, it's huge and immense. And just reading the book, I haven't read or heard a lot of stories specifically related to a person with a physical disability and all the challenges. And when I was reading it, you just really felt, the book doesn't get, it's emotional and it's empowering, but it's not like soft and weepy where you feel sorry for what you're reading about. Did I get misty and feel teary because I felt bad about the circumstance and how hard she had to fight? But also I felt angry with her. Like, my fists were up. I'm like, what? And she's just trying to like go down the hall and go to the bathroom. Like, that's just a basic thing we take for granted. And it's just, I just love that it was just, the book is basically just like a listing of all of her accomplishments and all the things she had to go through. But it also really makes you think about how one person can start a movement and keep it moving forward. She was so inspiring to her peers across the country and putting together these, just organizing and protesting. And then all of the organizations within the government she worked with and for and created. It's just amazing. It's just really, really wonderfully inspiring. At the end of the book, she lists a quote by Shirley Chisholm, the first Black Congresswoman, where she says, "You don't make progress standing on the sidelines, whimpering and complaining. You make progress by implementing ideas." And that's what Judy did. And I just think it's just wonderful. That was a big ramble, but it's just a great insight into some things you wouldn't think about,
Yeah, I think too, like, one thing this book does is it kind of asks the question, like, and she did this, I would think she would say, "I don't want to be cured. I don't have anything to be cured of." Like, she's not sick, and I think that there's that distinction between looking at disabilities as like a health issue and looking at it as a civil rights issue. Mm-hmm. And I think this book does a good job of posing this question, like, why would a society not have the infrastructure to support and create equity for people with disabilities? Because anybody can have a disability and everybody probably will have a disability. I mean, like, aging, she talks about that. It's like there's always the possibility that you could be disabled in some way. And there's people with visible, disabilities we can't see. And I think like the work she had to go through that you're talking about, Amanda, just shows again, like, why wouldn't a society want to take care of something that is going to affect everybody and does affect everybody? And I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to cost. This is a civil rights issue that's always going to cost money because, accommodations have to be made, and rightfully they should. But I found that frustrating and interesting. And I think it was her doggedness that really helped repeat that point. So,
yeah. And one point she was talking about, they were going to make the schools in New York accessible. And then they kept talking about how much it would cost and how much it would cost. And it like was cheaper than putting in like the HVAC system or the air conditioning or something, just to give like ramps and to make the building accessible. One thing I like to, I hadn't heard of Judy Heumann before I watched the movie Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution last year. I think it came out in 2020 and I watched it last year. And that was my introduction to her. So when the book came across, as the selection for this year, I was like, oh, she's amazing. I kind of want to hear more of her story and more of what she's done. And the book is a list of all of her accomplishments, but it's just, her list is so long. She has worked with so many state and local and like governmental levels. Like she worked in the Clinton administration, she worked in the Obama administration. She was like the highest ranking, like disabled person, like in the government. It's just amazing. It's just amazing. And she never gave up. And she just, keeps on going. It's just amazing.
Yeah. I want to just bring it back a little bit to talking about how disability functions in society and how those of us who walk around without a disability just sort of take that for granted. And I think about that a lot. And I hope that people read this book and it brings that to light and people start thinking about that. And I have a quote right here from the book that Judy says, disability is a natural aspect of the human condition. As people live longer, as we fight more wars, as medical care continues to improve, more and more people who might have died in an earlier era will live. Perhaps with a disability, we should accept it, plan for it, build our society around it. And I feel so strongly about that. And I hope that other people start thinking about it that way. Like, this is not something that is other from you. This is something that could happen to you tomorrow. I actually think about this one woman from Crip Camp quite a bit when I'm thinking about this. She was a very beautiful, popular girl in high school. She was actually in her yearbook voted cutest walk. And shortly after graduating, she was hit by a bus and became paraplegic. And it just flipped her world upside down to go from like one extreme to the other. And just thinking about how that can happen in an instant. Like, we could walk out of this and that happen, and other things too, like that, how many people develop macular degeneration as they get older. And that's just a natural part of aging for a lot of us. And people don't think about it until it starts to happen to you. And it's just really something that I think people need to start thinking about now.
If you think about it, like the ADA and having buildings that are accessible, I mean, it was passed in 1990 and it wasn't implemented until like 1992. That is super recent. So when we were all children, the buildings were still not accessible for our peers. And it's just, I really enjoyed the beginning of the book when she talked about when she was younger and she never viewed herself as a person with a disability who couldn't do things other kids could. I mean, she knew she couldn't roll up the curb as somebody else. She knew she needed to holler up to her friend's window for them to come down and let her in. But it didn't stop her. She just wanted to do the things she wanted to do. But at the same time, she also talks about how everything was a conscious effort of going from point A to point B. Was how do you get around the curb? How do you safely cross the street? She's not allowed to cross the street. And then once you are in a building safely, like, how do you go to the bathroom? And just thinking day to day, like all of the pieces, and how she felt like a burden. There's a couple of little blurbs I have here. Now the movie is called Crip Camp, but it was Camp Gen Ed. That's the title of the movie. So at Camp Gen Ed, that was when it was a camp for physically and mentally disabled children or teenagers. And she talks a lot in the book about how empowering and how free that she and her other teen peers felt at this camp, because they didn't feel like a burden. They didn't feel like an interruption or an intrusion to somebody's day. She didn't have to rate what help she needed with the most and what thing to ask for first. Everything at the camp was accessible, so they could just live their teenager lives. They were like off smooching in the woods. They were just being free and being who they were without worrying about like being included in the classroom or being included, or can I get on the bus, that kind of a thing. There's a quote where she says, camp, I thought, was what it would feel like if society included us. So just her thoughts on that and how limited she was in her mobility, and then how free that this experience. And that was, she was already pretty feisty, and coming from her parents who were fighting for her right to be in a school. She's 5, but she is not a fire hazard. She has a right to learn just like any other child. And Judy, she is whip smart, holy smoke. So I really like the beginning of the book when she talks about how camp opened up so many doors for organizing and becoming involved in making changes to her for herself and those around her.
I also felt like this book was a little bit of a roller coaster. So like it took you on a little bit of a ride where like there were so many ups where she's making these changes in legislation and you're just like so on this high, like this is great. And then like you said, Christopher, with everybody in politics dragging their feet and making sure that these things don't go through, and then they do go through and it's so great and everything. And then this book brings us pretty close up to the present because it was just recently published. And so you get down to a pretty low when she starts talking about the Trump administration and the changes that they started to make to bring down the ADA and other legislation for people with disabilities, like almost immediately, like day of coming into office. And that was like a really low of the book for me. But obviously all needed to be said, but I liked that at the end, there is she does a bit of a call to action. So there's not, things suck right now. And that's how it is. That's not how Judy is. And so, she says, run for office, participate in elections, vote like your life depends on it, because it does. All those things that I found the end of the book to be inspiring as well. It's like, okay, I do think about doing these things, being an activist, like going out and making my voice heard. But have I really, really done that? Mm-hmm. Maybe it's time. So I liked the end where it's like, well, you can maybe not be as feisty and as whip smart as Judy, but you too can help with this activism. So I liked that a lot about the book too.
Katie, I think on that point of the highs and lows, for me, that really was brought home when she was trying to get on the plane. And here's this confident person who is doing these amazing things, and her trajectory, what she's going to do in her life. And then she's so vulnerable. It's like as if in any moment someone can just pluck you out of the crowd and say, you there? No, we're denying you something basic. And people must feel so vulnerable and so easily attacked and noticeable, And for me, that was a very telling scene in the book.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like this interesting. She talks about vulnerability and how like it's something that extends for these people through their everyday life, but also how they're just not considered. She and the other people she knows and other people with, mental or physical disabilities are not considered to be truly human. Basically, like nobody when she was younger asked her what she wanted to do when she grew up. She went to school where they didn't provide education. She had 2.5 hours of teacher time a week at her school in a classroom of mixed age from like 6 years old to 18, because the thought is like, these people can't learn. I think that people with disabilities are often asexualized. Like nobody's going to assume that she wants to date or get married. She tells that story of the guy coming to her dorm room and saying, we're looking for a third person for our triple date. Do you know anybody who's available? Not like, do you want to be part of it? And I think that like that lack of consideration for someone's humanity helps make them vulnerable in the way that you're talking about, Christopher, where it's just like, well, I can move this thing out of the way. It's a hazard, and it's just constantly, I thought about that, like the way that they are highly visible. She's highly visible in her wheelchair, but also invisible at the same time. I think that's an interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah. One other big thing for me too was that here's Judy doing all this stuff, leading these movements, getting stuff done. But the other message I got out of this book is the other people that joined her. There were so many people that came to the sit-in that helped out. And then she talks about even the mayor of San Francisco getting involved. And I found that really inspiring as well. It's not just one person. It might be one person starting out to speak out on something, but then all it takes is other people to say, I'm with you. And I found that very powerful.
Yeah, she did a lot and she was a leader, but she was never alone. She was never alone. She had people, she inspired those around her to stay. Like when they were sitting in or marching, she wanted people who can stay. And it was hard for people to stay. Like when they were doing their sit-ins at the federal building, I mean, that was 23 days or something. And these were people who couldn't easily just like lie on the floor and like go to sleep. Like they still needed, assistance going to the bathroom. They needed somebody to bring them food. They had people who needed medication, and she was bold and she inspired. She was one more day. And it led to several weeks. So she was never alone. She inspired those around her to move with her.
To that point that like those people, when the sit-in was over and they'd accomplished what they wanted to accomplish, it was this strange, bittersweet feeling because they did what they wanted to do, but none of them wanted to leave because it was like being at camp again, where they were amongst people who recognized them as people and they made friends and they fell in love and they had, this experience. So I thought that was really kind of a bittersweet moment in the book. I mean, it was sad to read about, but also like they accomplished what they set out to do.
I do think it's absolutely amazing that people were documenting this back then, before the days of the internet, when you expect to see footage of everything. The fact that the movie Crip Camp exists and that they have some of the video and audio recordings that they do is just incredible. It's just kind of like a companion to this book, being able to see the things that were happening. So if anybody has not seen that and they do get an opportunity to watch Crip Camp and you liked the book, I would highly recommend it. I know we've been talking about it a lot, but it's wild to be able to just like read those passages and then to actually view it happening.
I feel like this is a good stopping point. Does anybody have any final thoughts they want to share on the book? Or Judy, or...
I mean, I feel like this book, you could talk about it for days. There's so much good stuff in it, but we can't do that. So I would just say, like, to piggyback on what you just said, Katie, with watching the documentary Crip Camp, but also just if you get a chance to read this book, I so highly recommend that you do. I feel like it should be required, but.
Yeah, I was really glad this book was chosen. The book is only a couple hundred pages. It's an amazing audiobook. If you're able to listen to the audiobook, I highly recommend that. It's a great book. I'm really glad it was chosen. It really gives some insight into people with disabilities and all of the things that we've had to go through to make things accessible and our things we take for granted as an able person who takes things for granted, like day to day. It's a really good insight. And so this is this year's pick for the 2022 Washtenaw Reads. There are other events happening, so take a look at the website, washtenaw.reads.org, and you can see what else is going on regarding the book. We are so glad you joined us today for our discussion. As you can see, we're all big fans of the book. We highly recommend you read it, listen to it, or watch the movie. And we're grateful you're here today, and we will see you next time with another exciting book topic.